What's going on, everybody? My name is Ben and welcome back to the bench for another episode of Ben Builds with Joe and our Tamiya 1/40th scale D.520. We're going to go ahead and start off right away with something I'm not really that excited to do, but we need to go ahead and get it done. That's going to be the masking of the canopy. Now I'm going to go ahead and use whatever tape I have, which is Tamiya and Frog masking tape, and we're just going to go ahead and mask off the front windscreen, the center portion of the canopy, and then the two rear windows. Now my hope is to go ahead and get those all nicely masked up and install the windscreen and the rear windows, leaving the center portion completely unglued so we can go ahead and pose that open. Just from a brief, cursory glance here, I do notice that the windscreen sits very, very nicely there under the fuselage. So I'm not too concerned about that. Looks good on all ends. We should be able to go ahead and glue that down with some PVA glue. In terms of the rear windows, they also seem to be pretty decent in shape and measurement. So I say we go ahead and start masking those and see if we can't get them installed as well. Now, in order to mask those two rear panel windows, we need to go ahead and come up with a little different way of doing that because my hand is not as steady as I'd like it to be. And I want to go ahead and make sure I maintain a nice curved frame. And I don't really have the raised detail in order to follow. So what we're going to do instead is I'm going to take our rear windows and I'm actually going to trace the outline with a pencil here on my Frog tape. Now that I'm actually hoping is going to give us an opportunity to match the curvature of that rear window. I'm not really sure how it's going to go, but we get a nice sharp pencil and we can go ahead and come in here and we can just trace the outlines of each of these windows. That's going to give us more or less the curve that we can use for our mask. So let's go ahead and just trace out this window here and we'll see how it turns out. Now, since it's all nicely traced, we're going to go ahead and cut it with an X-Acto knife, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut it by hand. This is actually not too difficult to do because I have a guide. Now that it's all cut though, let's go ahead and pull it here off of the cutting mat and let's go ahead and see what we have. Yeah, so that actually gives us one piece of tape that completely covers the entire clear part. We need to go ahead and maintain a little frame around the edge of the window. So let's go ahead and cut this in half. That's going to give us a lower and an upper part of our mask. Then we're just going to go ahead and grab one of those and we're going to match the top section so that we maintain that nice curve along with that frame. And once we get that done, we're going to go ahead and install the lower part of the mask, again making sure that we have a nice curvature and everything lines up. So I think that's going to be a good way to do it. We're going to go ahead and do that to the other one and we're going to push on and mask off all the rest of the canopy, get that ready to go, install those and see what we can do. So let's go ahead and get on with our first time lapse, guys. Get this thing moving. All right, everybody, we are back and our canopies are all nicely masked, and we've gone ahead and attached the front windscreen and those rear panels. So we are good to go. Now we have to come in with some Gunzy blue, go ahead and make sure those frames match the internal part of the cockpit, and then, well, we're pretty golden to go ahead and start primer. Now I have noticed that center portion of the canopy doesn't really want to fit as well in the open position, but I think it's going to be okay. We're going to come in and hopefully tack that into the open position. So now it's time for some primer. Now I have both white and I have gray Stynylrez primer. I'm probably going to go ahead and use the gray. The white is okay, but it doesn't necessarily cover as well as I would like it to. So we're going to go ahead and use the gray, and I want to overcoat the entire aircraft. That's going to go ahead and not only expose any sort of seam issues that we may have still that we don't see with the naked eye, it's also going to allow us to get ready for next episode for pre-shade and hopefully at least the base colors for the camo. Looking at the decals, I was trying to figure out if I'm going to go ahead and paint on these markings. And there's one little issue. You notice back here on the decals that we're going to use, we have the name Dewoitine and D.520 and then an aircraft number. Now that is not included as a separate part of the decal. So that is a little bit worrisome. I'm going to have to use these rudder decals. And I'm pretty sure that means I'm going to use the rondels as well. I mean, it's not really ideal. I actually was really hoping to go ahead and try to paint on some of the national markings, but I'm just going to go ahead and use the decals, I think, as they come here in the kit. A little disappointing, but again, I don't want to have to farm with matching colors. That's going to be the easiest way to do it, and I'm sure it's going to look fine. Now moving on, guys, when we have that center section sitting in the middle, it actually covers up the very edge of that panel for the rear windows. We can't have that because that has to be not only the insignia blue color, but it also has to be then overcoated with primer and then eventually painted. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to use some paper towel, slightly moistened, and we're just going to go ahead and wedge it down into the different nooks and crevices so that we have everything sealed up and we can come in with our primer and any other colors, and that should be perfectly fine. Hopefully we won't get paint all over the inside of our cockpit, because that's something I want to really try to avoid. Tamiya is an amazing company. I love the kits that they produce, and this kit has been a joy to build so far. But I do notice a little bit of a seam line here on the propeller blades and around the propeller hub. So I'm just going to go ahead and take my time, take our jeweler files, and clean up each of these blades and make sure that everything is nice and smooth and we don't have any of those lines running right down the middle of the propeller. But really, honestly, it's not that big of a deal. Then I think we'll go ahead and put it together, tack everything in place, and then we'll go ahead and overcoat that with primer. The entire subassembly is going to be flat black, so I'm not too concerned about painting the blades before I go ahead and attach everything together. So let's go ahead and just clean this up, glue them together, and get them ready for primer. Now I'm not going to install the propeller 100%. I'm actually just going to go ahead and friction fit that in place, but I'm not going to go ahead and push it all the way to the fuselage. Now I think we're going to go ahead and move over, have a couple of extra parts we need to clean up, like the wheels and the landing gears, and then I think we'll be ready for primer. Now talking a little bit about the landing gears, we do have a seam running right down the center of that on both sides. So we need to go ahead and just file that off with the jeweler files, sand it down just a little bit there, and I think we'll be good to go. I was actually looking back through my references and trying to figure out if I can add some brake cables to this particular aircraft. I had a lot of fun adding brake cables to my F9F8P Photo Cougar, so I thought, why not try to add some brake cables here? But strangely enough, I haven't been able to find any references that show brake cables on the D520. Now that could just simply mean that they are hidden between the landing gear and the gear bay door, but if they are, you wouldn't really see them anyway. So I'm probably not going to worry about that too much, but it was my intention to go ahead and add in some brake cables to this particular model. Now, one thing I also did notice is that even though Tamiya is typically very good with any sort of flash or any sort of ejector pin marks, we do have a couple of ejector pin marks on the inside of the landing gear bay door. I don't know if we're really going to be able to see them, but I'm going to go ahead and just take them down with the jeweler file and with some sandpaper. I have to be very careful with this though, because we have a lot of very nice raised detail, like rivets and whatnot, that run on the inside of the door. So I don't want to disturb those or remove those completely. I just want to go ahead and take off a little bit of the ejector pin marks so they're not so prominent. Then I think we'll be okay. And the last thing we're going to have to go ahead and work on are the wheels. And again, very tiny little seam line that runs the entire circumference of the tire. So that's not that big of a deal. We'll go ahead and just sand that down with some jeweler files, give it a quick shot of sandpaper, and I think that's going to be perfect. So let's go ahead and jump into our second time lapse. We're going to push on with some painting. We're going to get the cockpit frame all nicely painted up, and then we'll go ahead and prime the entire thing in gray Stynylrez primer. Let's do it, guys. We are almost done with today's episode. All right, everybody, as you can see, we are back and our D520 is more or less nicely primed. Now, this is a nice thing about primer. It does highlight any imperfections in seams, and we do have a little trouble here with the front nose. We are going to have to go ahead and correct that. Otherwise, the top of the aircraft looks pretty sweet. On the bottom section, we have a little bit of issue right around that wing root area. Nothing too bad, really. And that main gap, the gap that we have between the wing and the fuselage, that's more or less gone. So I'm happy about that. We do have a little bit of some seam issues right towards the back part of the fuselage, but again, that's not going to be that difficult to do. We can fix it up when we fix up the nose. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out so far. So let's go ahead and call it quits for today, guys. Next time we'll come on back and we will go ahead and start pre-shading, go ahead and clean up a couple of those seams, and I think we'll be ready to go ahead and see how we can do the camo. So until then, guys, you know the drill. Go out there, get yourself some bench time, have some fun, build something cool, and we'll see you back here on the next episode of Ben Builds with Joe and our 1/48 scale Tamiya D520. Thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you soon.